We have with us today Mr. Deepak Dalal, who has been bridging that gap for years with his wonderful stories of wildlife and nature. His books Ranthambore and Lakshadweep posit as a window to our natural riches and our wonderful surroundings. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Deepak Dalal.
Morning, everybody. Yes, I'm inspired by nature, and most of my stories have a lot to do with wildlife. When I was young, I think it all happened when I was very young. So it all began when I was about 10 years old, and I'm originally from Mumbai, and I went to a boarding school, Lawrence School, Lovedale in Ooty. And that school had 750 acres of land as opposed to the little school I went to in Mumbai. And out there, we had to trek between classes, long distances, and then there were mountains around, and on weekends we used to climb them. And I think that's when I fell in love with nature. And I should have possibly taken on a career in this. I should have thought that maybe this is what I want to study: wildlife, travel, literature, and books. But I was destined to become a chemical engineer because in our family, everybody is an engineer. We have a an industry which sells equipment to the chemical industry, and so I just kind of drifted along in that. But while I was learning my engineering, instead of reading engineering journals, I used to read wildlife journals. Even then, it didn't strike me I was in the wrong place. But anyway, so I finished my studies. I came back to India, worked in the family company, and then I remember during those holidays, I just traveled and traveled and traveled. And it all started with going to, the big Everest base camp, Annapurna base camp. I love the Himalayas. Then one day, I love our coastline. I walked about 150 kilometers down the coastline, and I just discovered so many beautiful things out there which people don't know about our country. I also went to our game sanctuaries. I did another trek along. I live in Pune now, and in those days, I used to do a lot of trekking in our backyard, and we trekked from a place called Lonavala to Mahabaleshwar, just keeping along the Western Ghats and not along the main roads. And I discovered so many of Shivaji's forts, which I didn't know about, and they were so beautiful. And somewhere along that line, while I was just moving around India, I just said, maybe I should write books. And I really love travel. I love wildlife. And maybe I could put these things together and set them not in cities and not in foreign countries, but very much in our own country, in places which we don't really go to, we don't know much about, and try and introduce kids to these places through these stories, by setting adventure stories. And so I set about doing that, and it eventually landed up writing about 8 to 10 books just on these kind of just getting kids connected with India and with wildlife, and not with Indian cities, but Indian wilderness areas. So I'm just going to show you a few slides as to what really inspired me from nature as to write stories based in India. So, okay, this is the area of India which I really love a lot, our Himalayas. Everybody talks about the Andes and the Alps and, traveling to those places. But, we have the best range right in our backyard. Next, please. Right from starting in, I'll just show you on this thing. 1 second. Oops. Okay, anyway, you can see the sweep starting all the way from Kashmir, going down. Yeah. Going all the way down through Himachal, Uttarakhand, through Nepal, Bhutan, and into Arunachal. We have such an incredible range of mountains. And I go there every year, and there's always a new place to go to. It's just endless. It is so beautiful.
It's working.
It's working?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Can't see the LED. It's LED.
Oh, that's why you can't see. All right. So, next, please. And then we have 8,000 kilometers of coastline, 8,000. And I just walked down about 150 kilometers. It was so beautiful. So much to see, so much that we don't know, and forget about children knowing about. Next, please. And when you're walking, you just see sights like this. I mean, such serene, quiet, beautiful places, which nobody goes to. Next, please. Kashmir, the great bowl of Kashmir. But, in the middle of the Himalayas, suddenly there's a sunken section. And that is the Valley of Kashmir, which is in itself so beautiful. Next, please. I'm just showing you the places that kind of inspired me and why I started writing for children. This is Ladakh, the ultimate wilderness. It's, next please, it's a desert. And it's not a desert in the terms of what how we speak of deserts. When we think of them, we think of hot tropical places like the Sahara or our Thar Desert. But this desert, what's different about it is that it's a frozen, cold place. In fact, if you look in the newspapers for the lowest temperature in India, always it's generally in Ladakh. It's in the wintertime, minus 25, minus 30. It's a different kind of desert altogether. Next, please. And of course, we have the traditional deserts in Thar and in the Rajasthan section. So, I'm just showing you all the diversity within our country which we have. And this is really what inspired me to write. Next, please. And we have our own tropical forests. This is tropical rainforest, and this is the Andaman Islands. And the Andaman Islands are so beautiful, and I've said a couple of stories there. Next, please. And then Arunachal Pradesh, that far corner of India where 80% is still forest. It's another one of my favorite areas. You have these bamboo forests, the alpine forests. We have so much in our country, which, we just don't go to. Next, please. This is the area I live in. It is in my backyard, the Sahyadris or the Western Ghats. And it is so beautiful out there. I've said a couple of stories here too. Next, please. And of course, the deciduous forests of Kanha. And, we all know about the story Mowgli. And Rudyard Kipling got his inspiration right here in these forests of Kanha. And this is where the story of Mowgli was born. Next. And then we have the Terai region. Everywhere across the Himalayas, which are the northern end of India, you have rivers just coming off the mountains. And these rivers are high-speed rivers. And when they finally hit the plains, they lose their forward momentum and they spread. And when they spread, you get these grasslands all along the Himalayas. And it's called the Terai. And these grasslands, again, so beautiful. Next, please. And of course, you know where this is, right? Our very own Maldives, okay? It's the Lakshadweep Islands. The Lakshadweep Islands and the Maldives are identical. There is no difference, all right? It's the same chain. And we got the top 27 islands. The remaining 1,000 belong to the Maldives. So, they're so beautiful. If you just look at the beaches. I took this photograph from 1,000 feet up. And the water is so clear that you can see sharks, you can see turtles, in about 30, 40 feet depth of water. You can see it from right up there. I don't know, I just keep giving this comparison. If you're going to Mumbai to Chowpatty Beach or you put your feet in there, you can't even see your feet. And here you're talking about incredible clarity of water. So, these are the things. In fact, my first book was set here in the Lakshadweep Islands. I was very lucky to be part of a windsurfing team that windsurf, at least we thought we could, windsurf between the islands. We had no idea what we were up against, but the great thing was we lived with the locals, we went fishing with the locals, we scuba dived with the locals, and they really introduced us to their lives. And that's how my first book, Lakshadweep Adventure, came about. Next, please. The Andamans. Where do you see, in this world today, where do you see beaches like this, untouched, where the forest comes right down to the sea? This is Interview Island. I was here with an ornithologist who was who was actually protecting a bird called the edible nest swiftlet. It makes nests fully from its saliva. They don't use twigs or the stuff which other birds use. The whole thing comes out from inside. They have these extraordinary salivary glands. And unfortunately, because this is made from bird tissue, they're edible. And because they're edible, people break them and they assign, you heard of bird nest soup, right? Which is popular again right through South Asia. So that comes from these nests, and these nests are very valuable, that's why, because they're saleable, and $400 a nest is what they get. So they just break the nests. And, it doesn't matter whether the babies are inside the nest, all the hatchlings fall down. And in these caves that we're here on this island called Interview Island, where nobody lives except 40 elephants. And, we stayed there I stayed there a week, but my friend stayed there 3 months, protecting 3 sets of caves. And he didn't allow anybody to get anywhere near those caves. And that time, it was the first time ever, in 15 years, that babies flew out from there, some 2,000 odd babies. But, this is what inspired me to write a couple of stories in the Andamans. Next, please. So that's India for you. If you compare it to, say, Saudi Arabia, or even, it's practically the same size as Saudi Arabia. And look at the Sahara Desert nearby, probably just a fraction of that size. But both those areas have just got one geography, which is desert. And I just showed you in India what we had, from the Lakshadweep Islands to the Andaman Islands, to the Himalayas, to the coastline, to the forest, to the Terai. So much beauty, and this is really what inspired my writing in India. Next, please. So it's more than that. Even we have diversity. I'm not going through all the wildlife, etc., because we don't have time. So I'm just showing the diversity in people. The Jarawa. You probably heard of them, right? The Stone Age people, they're actually hunter-gatherers still. We gave up hunter-gatherers being hunter-gatherers about 10,000 years back. But today they're still leading the same lives our ancestors led for more than 100,000 years, which is hunt and gather. And they're Indians. But it's very difficult to meet them. I was very lucky to spend a couple of days with them. And I have a story in the Andaman Islands called the Jarawa. Next, please. These are the people of Arunachal. Arunachal's got so many different tribes, in the sense that out there, this is where the Himalayas begin. So you got the foothills out there, and those foothills are treacherous. And people lived in one valley because the forests are so thick, never moved to the next valley. And so you had completely different tribes from valley after valley after valley. You got 50 different tribes in the Arunachal. So this is the diversity of people we have also. Just trying to point out. Next. These are the Bakarwalas of Kashmir. And they come in every year from Jammu. In the summertime, they bring their sheep right up there to graze, and it's a yearly migration that still happens. Next, please. So that's the Bakarwalas. Next, please. The Rabari, the last of the Indian nomads, along with the Bakarwalas. So I'm just telling you the different type of people we have in our country. We live in cities, but we're not aware of these things. Next. And these are the Changpas. Parts of Tibet belong to India. Ladakh is actually a part of Tibet. That is the land beyond the Himalayas, that's around 15,000 feet above sea level. And out there, it's called the Changtang, actually, which means the northern plain. That's how the locals call it, the Changtang. And the people who live there are called the Changpas. They're Indian too. They don't look Indian, but they're very much Indian. And you speak to them in Hindi, they'll reply to you in Hindi. They herd yaks, zoos, and other animals, and lots of sheep. Next, please. The people of Lakshadweep, they're all Muslim. Actually, what happened is that during the old days, when a lot of trade happened between Oman and Kerala, and during those days, the Lakshadweep Islands were a barrier that was in between when they sailed, and many of them got shipwrecked on these islands. And it's their descendants who live there. They speak a very different language also from Malayalam. Next, please. So all this exciting diversity, I want to fill this vacuum and tell people about India and its wild places. Next, please. So some of the books I've written, that's Lakshadweep Adventure. It was my very first book. And I told you I lived with the locals for a month. I went scuba diving with them. I went fishing with them. We windsurfed between the islands together, and so that's how the story came about. Next, please. Ranthambore is set in our very own forests, and it's all about the tiger. The story was inspired by actually learning what is happening about the killing of tigers and why they're being killed. And I wanted to communicate this to kids and try and create a connection between them and nature. And that's how the story came about. Next, please. Ladakh Adventure, one of my favorite places. I enjoyed researching the story. Next, please. The Snow Leopard Adventure. You know, I got inspired by reading this book by Peter Matheson when I was a kid, when I went to Everest. And they spoke about this incredible animal, incredibly beautiful, but so difficult to spot. It's called the Grey Ghost of the Himalaya. And I got so inspired by that I actually spent a couple of months searching for this animal, and that's how the story came about. Next, please. The Jarawa, I just spoke to you about the Jarawa, and that's how this book came about in the Andaman Islands. Next. And India's, all across the subcontinent of India, there is not a single live volcano. But on Barren Island, in the Andaman Islands, we have the only live volcano. And I went to the Andaman Islands, I said, I had to set a story here. And it's very difficult to get there. I was very lucky to get there, and that's how this story came about. Next, please. And these are the two later books, Sayadri Adventure, Anirudh's Dream. This actually is in my backyard. The most beautiful Western Ghats out there. And the story also is it's my only book which goes into history. It delves into Mumbai in the 1850s and tells you about the origins of Mumbai and the heritage of the city. And so next, please. Koleshwar is another one which is again set in our Western Ghats. And next, please. Yeah, okay, these are the new books which have come about. I'm trying to now connect kids with birds, because the only birds they know are crows, pigeons, maybe sparrows, kites, myna, possibly. But there are 1,200 species of birds found in India. From storks to cranes to hornbills to ibises. I could go on and on. And kids have no clue. And they say, oh, what a pretty bird, nothing more than that. So I thought maybe they have great illustrations. Because the kids have to identify the bird through the illustrations. And I'm lucky to have a really good illustrator, Krishna Bala Shenoy, who is the new illustrator of these books. And so we're trying to create a connection between kids and birds through this news. It's a series. It's the same children. It's all about birds, bird characters. And this is the new series, Talon the Falcon. Next, please. A Flamingo in My Garden. It's about a flamingo. And Mumbai has 100,000 flamingos. Even Mumbai walas have no clue that you have so many flamingos there. And so it's a Mumbai flamingo who gets lost, and it's a story about that. Next, please. Okay, there are a couple of more books. There's Paradise Flycatcher, and there's a new one coming out in a couple of months, and that is called The Golden Eagle. So yeah, that's my journey in nature, travel, and writing. And I've been lucky in the sense a lot of schools have picked up these books and they use them as readers because they speak about nature and they introduce kids to places they would probably never go to. And they're adventure stories, and that's what I've been doing these last few years. If there's any questions, well, I went on a group expedition, and so there's this gentleman called Dr. Raghu Chundawat. He is the expert on snow leopards in Asia, and so he had an expedition when they went out. He took a lot of people from around the world to actually go and search for the snow leopard, and so I went with him. And I didn't see the snow leopard that time. We searched and searched for 2 weeks, but it just didn't happen. But then I had the story ready, and I released the story without actually seeing the snow leopard. And when kids asked me, have you seen the snow leopard? I had to tell a lie and said, yes, I have, because you have to be, if you're not true to kids, they're not going to read your book. I couldn't say that I hadn't seen the snow leopard, I read the book. But then on the second trip, I went back and I saw it the second time. And my girls were with me at that time. And we went there for 3 weeks, and they were both lucky enough to see it. And that's when I saw it the second time. So that animal that he's killed is called a zoo. It's a cross between a yak and a cow. And he's very angry with us because he wants to eat, but he can't eat because we're there. It was about, you could say 50, 60 meters, and we were in a tent. We didn't want to be visible to him. That's my daughter's going, oh gosh. And look at that tail, it's just an incredibly large tail. And he settled there. Okay, I think that's enough. Thanks. So I did see a snow leopard. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. Jarawa. Well, the first time I went to the Andaman Islands, I couldn't meet the Jarawa. You're not supposed to. Nobody's allowed to. So every avenue I tried, they just stopped me. Then, if you heard of Admiral Arun Prakash, who was the Chief of Naval Staff for some time, before that he was posted to the National Defense Academy. That's where I live in Pune. And we became good friends, and when he became the Commander-in-Chief of the Andaman Islands, and he knew I wanted to set a story out, they said, Deepak, let me know what all you want. And so I told him, listen, I want to meet the Jarawa. And that's it. And I said, okay, come down. And I went down, and this time, at every barrier where I'd been stopped, I got a salute. And so we went through. Generally, you just cannot go in on your own. And even if you go in on your own, you're liable to get a spear put through you. But what had happened was the Jarawa, long back, about maybe before I went, about 10 years before that, they are not exposed to our kind of diseases, so they don't have our kind of immunity to diseases. So one of them caught chicken pox, and the whole tribe got chicken pox, and they were like falling out of the trees. And there was this gentleman called Ashok, who was the police officer in that area, and station house officer, SHO he was. And he went inside along with another gentleman, and they went and actually picked up the Jarawa and brought them in, treated them. And so they became friends with the Jarawa. They actually learnt their language. And I was privileged enough to go in with Ashok. And so I spent a couple of days with them, and that's how it all happened. Thank you. It's changing very fast. This story was written about 15 years back. So, it's Changpa, this lifestyle is changing. They have jeeps now where they used to ride horses. So, yeah. So it's changed a lot. It's progress. That's progress. No, like for example, the Jarawa are more or less finished, in the sense that they built the Andaman Trunk Road, which goes right through their forest. And in those days, there was hardly any contact, but things are changing because more and more as people go through. And the Jarawa, unfortunately, are exposed to the worst of our people, because the people who live along the borders with them, unfortunately, this Ashok was a very gentle, nice policeman, but the others who live there, who drink and, who are just, they're the ones who interact with the Jarawa. And there's 150 of them left. And there's not much. But there's a place called North Sentinel Island. You've probably been reading about that gentleman who tried to spread Christianity and who went to the island, right? So that island, nobody goes there. You see, the Jarawa live right in the center of the Andaman Islands. It's not an island, it's actually within the Andamans, the main. North Sentinel is about 30 kilometers out from a place called Vandur. That's the nearest port. And nobody goes there. So when this gentleman went, the story is nobody goes there. But there obviously has been some contact. And this gentleman tried to spread Christianity, but they don't tolerate anybody coming in, and he was killed on the spot. And there have been instances before that when fishermen get drunk and they've gone there, and they don't return. And when a helicopter goes to check, he's found on the beach with a spear in his back. And then, actually, when they found this fisherman there once, who was still on this beach and the dead body was there, the debate was, should we get the body out or not? But the Indian government stand is not to interfere. So he was left there, and his body was not brought back for his relatives. So, I mean, that's not a nice side of the story, but that's what's happening. No, and they were very, somehow they got to know about it. Not a single tribal died, you know. I don't know what they sensed, but they moved out. Yeah, nothing happened to them. So, anyway, thank you very much.